It was late September, and the leaves were just starting to hint at the vibrant display they'd soon offer. My buddy, Dave, and I were on a road trip across the Midwest, aiming to hit as many roadside attractions as we could before the harsh reality of our office jobs sucked us back in. It was one of those spur-of-the-moment decisions that felt like a desperate grasp at the remnants of our youth. We'd been driving for what felt like eternity when Dave mentioned that he was too tired to keep going. It was my turn to take the wheel, but honestly, the thought of driving through another pitch-black night on an endless highway wasn't appealing. That's when we spotted it, like a beacon in the night. A neon sign that simply read Motel, with an arrow pointing down a narrow, unlit road. It wasn't on the map, but that wasn't surprising. Half the charm of this trip was uncovering the uncharted or forgotten corners of America. The road to the motel was more pothole than pavement, and each bump felt like a direct hit to the spine. But eventually, the neon glow of the motel sign came into view, flickering intermittently but still fighting the darkness. The place was a relic from a bygone era, 2 stories of rooms that faced a central parking lot, the paint peeling and the neon sign buzzing with the effort of staying alive. We checked in at a small office that doubled as a lobby, manned by an elderly man who seemed as ancient as the motel itself. He handed us the key to room 12 with a nod, mentioning offhandedly that we were lucky to catch him awake. The transaction was brief, and his gaze lingered a little too long, but we brushed it off as the eccentricity of someone who'd probably seen too much of the world from behind that counter. Room 12 was at the far end of the second floor, and the stairs creaked under our weight with every step. The room itself was a time capsule, decorated with furnishings that hadn't seen an update since the 70s. It had a musty smell, the kind that clings to places untouched by time. We chuckled about it, making jokes to lighten the mood, but there was an underlying unease neither of us wanted to admit. Exhaustion quickly overtook us, and we collapsed onto the separate beds, the kind of deep sleep that only comes from pure fatigue. It was in the early hours of the morning when I awoke to a sound that didn't belong. It was a scraping, like something being dragged across the floor above us. I figured it was just another guest, but the thought that we were on the top floor quickly sobered me up. The scraping continued, rhythmic and deliberate, and I nudged Dave awake. He heard it too, and we sat there in the dark, trying to rationalize the sound. The decision to call the front desk was made with the hope that the explanation would be mundane, something we could laugh about in the morning. The phone line crackled to life, and I explained what we were hearing. There was a pause, and then the night manager's voice, heavy with sleep and irritation, informed us that the motel was fully booked, but no one was checked into the room above ours. In fact, he added, there wasn't even a room above ours. The motel was designed with an angled roof and attic space above the second floor for storage, not guest rooms. Dave and I exchanged a look, the kind that speaks volumes without a word. The sound continued, unfazed by our discovery. It was then that the night took a turn from unsettling to downright terrifying. A thud against our door jolted us from our beds. We froze, hearts racing, as another thud echoed through the room, followed by what sounded like a low, guttural moan. The moan was a sound that seemed to creep under the door and slither across the room, settling into the very air we breathed. It was primal, filled with a sorrow and longing that words could never fully encapsulate. Dave and I looked at each other, eyes wide with the kind of fear that freezes you to your core. Neither of us wanted to approach the door, yet the unspoken agreement hung between us that we couldn't just stay huddled in our beds. With a bravery born more of necessity than courage, I edged toward the door, Dave close behind me. The moans had ceased, replaced by a silence so thick it felt like a physical barrier. I reached out, hand trembling, and pressed my ear against the door, listening for any sign of what awaited us outside. Nothing but the silence greeted me. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and slowly cracked it open, half expecting some horror to come barreling in. But the corridor was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow light of the few functioning overhead bulbs. The air was stale, tinged with a scent I couldn't place, something old and forgotten. Dave whispered, "Should we check it out?" His voice was barely audible, a testament to the fear we both felt. But there was no turning back now. Nodding, we stepped into the hallway, our movements cautious, as if the very floorboards could betray us. The corridor was silent, our footsteps echoing unnaturally as we moved towards the stairs. That's when we noticed it. The attic door at the end of the hallway was ajar, a sliver of darkness peering out. The realization hit us both at the same time. The sounds had to have come from the attic. Approaching the door felt like an eternity, each step heavy with dread. We reached out, pushing the door fully open, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled upwards into darkness. The air grew colder as we ascended, our phone lights the only barrier against the enveloping blackness. At the top, the attic was expansive, filled with old furniture and boxes, dust motes dancing in our light beams. And then we saw it, a figure, hunched over in the far corner of the attic, its movements slow and deliberate. The scraping sound echoed once more, the source now apparent. The figure was dragging something heavy across the wooden floor, oblivious or indifferent to our presence. Neither Dave nor I could move, our fear rooting us to the spot. The figure stopped its dragging, turning to face us. The light from our phones illuminated a face that was not a face, but a mask, grotesque and twisted, a caricature of human sorrow. It was then we understood. The motel, this forgotten relic, was a place of stories, of secrets kept hidden in the shadows. The figure approached, and we could see it was draped in tattered garments, layers upon layers, as if trying to cover something unspeakable. It reached out, its hand trembling, not in a gesture of threat, but of plea, a silent beckoning. The moment hung between us, a choice unspoken. Dave and I backed away, not out of malice, but out of an instinctive need to flee from that which we could not understand. We descended the stairs, the figure's mournful moan following us, a lament for what was lost, for what could never be reclaimed. We didn't stop running until we reached our room, barricading the door with whatever we could find. The night passed in a haze of fear and disbelief, every creak and groan of the old motel a reminder of the attic and its occupant. By morning, the courage of daylight emboldened us to leave, to put as much distance between us and the motel as possible. We didn't speak of it, not wanting to acknowledge the reality of what we had encountered. The motel faded into the background of our journey, a dark chapter in an otherwise adventurous road trip. My name is Jackson. It was the summer of 2019. I was 27, living in a small house I had recently bought, enjoying the freedom and privacy it offered. That summer was particularly hot, leading many of us in the neighborhood to keep our windows open at night in a futile attempt to catch a cooling breeze. It was during one of these sweltering nights that I first noticed something odd. I had fallen asleep on my couch, a crime thriller left open on my chest, the TV droning in the background. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I awoke to a faint scraping sound, groggy and disoriented. I assumed it was just a branch from the old oak tree in my backyard scratching against the window. I turned over, pulling the blanket up to my chin, and drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I found my back door slightly ajar. A shiver ran down my spine as I approached it, wondering if I had forgotten to lock it the night before. But deep down, I knew I had. Something, or someone, had been in my house while I slept. I reported it to the police, but without any signs of forced entry or anything missing, there was little they could do. They suggested I might have left the door unlocked by accident, and that the wind could have pushed it open. I wanted to believe them, but the seed of fear had already been planted. I became vigilant, double-checking every window and door before going to bed. But the feeling of being watched, of being vulnerable, never left me. It was a few nights later when my fears were confirmed. I had just crawled into bed, the unease of the previous incident still gnawing at me, when I heard it again. The faint scraping sound, followed by the gentlest whisper of movement downstairs. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the baseball bat I had started keeping by my bed and crept toward the staircase. As I made my way down, every step seemed to echo through the house, betraying my position. My heart pounded in my chest, my grip on the bat tightening with every breath. When I reached the bottom, I flicked on the light, expecting to confront an intruder. But the room was empty. Feeling foolish but too wound up to sleep, I decided to make a sweep of the house. That's when I noticed it. The sliding door to the backyard, which I was sure I had locked, was open just a crack. And there, on the living room floor, was a small, muddy footprint. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Someone had been entering my house, not to steal or to vandalize, but simply to be inside. The thought was more terrifying than any tangible threat could have been. It was a violation of my sanctuary, my peace of mind. I called the police again, and this time they took me more seriously. They found a few more footprints outside, leading away from my house and disappearing into the night. It was clear someone had been there, but who and why remained a mystery. The next few weeks were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I installed security cameras, motion sensors, and even considered getting a dog. My home felt like a fortress, but the sense of security it once offered was shattered. Then, one evening, as I was reviewing footage from the security cameras, I saw her. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, wandering through my backyard with an aimless, almost ghostly gait. She seemed lost, confused, but there was a deliberateness in the way she approached the house, like she was drawn to it. I watched, transfixed, as she reached the back door and stood there for a long moment, just staring into the house. Then, just as quietly as she had appeared, she turned and walked back into the darkness from which she came. I reported the sighting to the police, and they started patrolling the neighborhood more frequently. But the woman never returned, or if she did, she never again triggered the cameras. The mystery of her identity and her motivations haunted me. Why my house? What was she looking for? Or whom? The incident slowly receded into the background of my life. But the sense of security I once took for granted was forever altered. I still look over my shoulder more often than I'd like to admit, and the sound of a branch scraping against a window can send my heart racing. In the end, the most horrifying aspect wasn't the invasion of my home, but the invasion of my mind. The constant wondering, the what-ifs, and the unsettling realization that we are never truly safe. Not even in our own beds. My name's Aaron, and I've been working in retail for about 5 years, hopping from one store to another in a sprawling mall outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Most days blended together in a blur of customer service smiles and endless restocking. But there was one day, one shift, that I'll never forget. A day when everything I thought I knew about the mundanity of retail work was turned on its head. I was working at a boutique clothing store, One of those trendy places that sold overpriced jeans and shirts that looked like they'd already been worn out by someone else. It was a slow Tuesday, the kind of day where the hours crawl by, and you find yourself checking the clock every 5 minutes. The mall was quieter than usual, the usual buzz of shoppers reduced to a mere whisper. Around mid-afternoon, a man walked in, breaking the monotony of the day. He was unremarkable at first glance, average height, wearing a nondescript jacket and a hat that cast a shadow over his face. But there was something unsettling about him, a vibe that set my nerves on edge. He didn't browse like other customers. Instead, he moved with a deliberate slowness, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat as he seemed to inspect each item with an intensity that was almost predatory. As I watched him from behind the register, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me, the lights in the store flickered. Once, then again, casting the space into a semi-darkness that seemed to linger a bit too long. The man didn't react, his focus never wavering from the clothes he was examining. Feeling a sense of duty, I approached him, offering assistance with a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "Can I help you find anything?" I asked, my voice slightly trembling despite my best efforts to sound normal. He finally looked up at me then, and the chill that went through me was like nothing I'd ever felt. His eyes were a deep, empty black, void of any emotion or humanity. He didn't respond, just continued to stare at me until I had to look away, the feeling of being preyed upon too intense to bear. I excused myself, retreating to the relative safety of the counter, but I couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes on me, watching my every move. Customers came and went, but the man remained, a silent, eerie presence amidst the racks of clothes. As the day began to wind down and the mall grew quieter, I realized with a sinking feeling that the man was still there. The store was supposed to close in 10 minutes, and yet he showed no sign of leaving. I approached him again, this time more firmly. "Sir, we'll be closing soon. Can I help you make a final selection?" He finally spoke then, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "You have something I need," he said, though he didn't specify what it was. I didn't know how to respond, confusion and fear warring within me. Before I could say anything else, the lights flickered again, plunging the store into darkness. I heard the sound of clothes being shuffled, the man's whispery voice muttering something unintelligible, and then, as the lights flickered back on, he was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving no sign he'd ever been there except for a chilling coldness in the air. I locked up the store, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key in the lock. The mall was nearly deserted as I made my way to the exit, the echoes of my footsteps sounding too loud in the empty corridors. I never saw the man again, and nothing was missing from the store. But sometimes, when the lights flicker, I remember those black eyes and the feeling of being hunted. It's a reminder that sometimes horror doesn't come from the outside. Sometimes it walks among us, hidden in plain sight.